It is exceptionally rare that I find myself agreeing with a mainstream news site, especially when it comes to things like Ahsoka, but these are the times we live in. And this article hits at something that I think has been a problem for Star Wars for a few years now, which is that some of these series on Disney Plus really seem like they're more like commercials than a story of their own. A great example would be the Book of Boba Fett, which had nearly 2 episodes devoted to Din Djarin and Grogu and Luke Skywalker. Now, I'm not going to read through the whole thing word for word, but let's get into it. So the author says, at the beginning of the season of Ahsoka, I wrote, can Ahsoka survive being Rebels Season 5? Amazingly, that didn't end up being its problem, at least not its biggest one. Ahsoka wasn't hamstrung by being a 5th season of a show not everyone watched, or people not understanding some character motivations, or who other characters were entirely. In the end, the problem was that whether it was called Ahsoka Season 1 or Rebel Season 5, it didn't end up being a season of television at all. Instead, it was individual nostalgia plays sprinkled throughout long patches of nothing. And what makes that so frustrating is that creator Dave Filoni absolutely rocks at delivering impactful, emotional, engaging, and most importantly, original Star Wars stories, or at least he usually does. Yes, I definitely agree with that last point. Now, I didn't agree with the first part there about it being a hamstrung 5th season of Rebels. I actually liked the idea that it could have just been a continuation of Rebels because that seemed like the logical decision. It definitely did not end up being that, though it might have been better if it was. Going to say, I want to be clear, I love the character Ahsoka. Hera Syndulla, criminally underused in this season, is one of the best contemporary Star Wars characters. I think as part of an ensemble cast, yes, I wouldn't want to watch a series about Hera Syndulla. I quickly grew to love Ezra Bridger after catching up on Rebels and meeting him in live action in this new series. And there were even a couple of episodes about Ahsoka that really tugged at my Star Wars loving heart. The first 2 episodes really felt like Star Wars. I definitely disagree with that. The first 2 episodes were mainly about Ahsoka and Sabine catching up, talking about their feelings. There wasn't really a hook there. Something about the Anakin episode, getting the author in their feelings. And then it goes on to television seasons have a job to tell a complete story regardless of whether or not they're meant to lead into something else. Ahsoka doesn't just not tell a complete story, but the fraction of the one it does tell just hangs in the air like the big bad thing they were trying to stop all season, Thrawn returning to the main galaxy, doesn't matter at all, which they're going to get into in a little bit. By the end of the season, not a single one of our main characters addresses the fact that the very thing that everyone was trying to stop happened. I know, right? Like, on the one hand, I knew going into it there was no way Thrawn was going to be defeated by the end of the season, especially because he didn't appear until episode 6, I think. I knew this was going to lead into something else, but I didn't feel the emotional impact from the main characters that I thought it would when he did, in fact, return to the main Star Wars galaxy. Ahsoka is completely at peace, seemingly indifferent to the threat the galaxy faces, despite the entire motivation of her character has been to stop Thrawn since her introduction into the live-action series. Then Hera and Ezra meet up, and neither exchanges a word about what his return means. The excitement these characters show to be reunited is important, of course, but not at the cost of engaging with your series' own stakes. It would have been easy as following up their tear-brimmed smiles with the dawning realization of what seeing each other again truly meant. Or Ezra pointing it out to Hera, who may not have realized that his return included the return of Thrawn. Sabine has made it abundantly clear that she's willing to sacrifice a whole galaxy if it means getting Ezra back home, so at least one person's reaction makes sense. That's it, we just end there. Supposedly because Dave Filoni is setting up a movie or a season 2 for Ahsoka, 2 things that should be wildly exciting but now can end up being in Star Wars purgatory with the rest of the franchise's many abandoned plans for all I care. Seasons of television are not commercials, they are foundations for what's to come. But Ahsoka Season 1 can't stand on its own because there's no foundation built, just a string of happenings until Ahsoka and Sabine are stranded and Thrawn's back in the Galaxy Prime. And if none of our primary characters give a shit about that, then why should we as viewers? Exactly. I mean, Ahsoka's whole purpose was to stop Thrawn. Sabine betrayed her, and even when they reunited, Ahsoka seemed to not care at all. She also seemed to not really be bothered by the fact that Thrawn was going to return to the main Star Wars galaxy, and Sabine seemed not to care that she was the one who engineered Thrawn's return to the galaxy. I mean, when she met up with Ezra, they reunite, they hug, okay fine, that takes like 30 seconds. The very next scene should have been Ezra looking at Sabine in absolute horror when he recognizes how it is she got to this universe and realizing that that might be a way for Thrawn to return back to, as this article writes, the prime Star Wars universe. And that would have been followed by Sabine also being horrified, but more so because she realizes that her friends are going to learn that she allowed Thrawn to return to the main galaxy. There was none of that. Sabine just strung Ezra along until TIE fighters came after them and Ahsoka returned. And he just let her. They just kept traveling along in those little pods. He didn't really press her on how she got there, had she seen Thrawn. It was just insane behavior. This is the ultimate enemy of the story, and in the end, nobody really cared. The ending with Sabine and Ezra trying to get onto the Star Destroyer seemed more like a quick little fun thing to show if Sabine could use the Force, rather than the high-stakes end-all of this series, where Thrawn finally returns after all these separate plot lines all came together. Let the past die, kill it if you have to, is a line I absolutely hate. Person writes, nostalgia's great, I love nostalgia, but it's meant to be a single tool in your arsenal rather than your only instrument. Skywalkers have been so aggressively shoehorned into so many stories they don't need to be in that it's getting to the point that I don't even want to hear the name anymore. The galaxy is vast, there are now many of them even. There are so many rich stories worth exploring, and all Star Wars seems capable of doing is returning to the same well over and over again. I enjoy Luke, I adore Leia, the stories are over, but not as over as their father's is meant to be. I mean, I don't think you can shoehorn Skywalkers into stories because the story has always been about them. Like, there wouldn't be Star Wars without the Skywalker saga. They've always been such an integral part of Star Wars because it was their story. It's not like George Lucas just created a galaxy, created a whole host of characters, and then said, okay, for the next 10 years, we're just going to focus on this family of characters. No, he created a hero's journey story focusing on Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader. Those two were father and son, and so the story for the next however many years focused on that family. It makes sense to keep going back to that family because they are Star Wars. But it goes on to talk about how Ahsoka Tano was basically overshadowed by Anakin. And I mean, Anakin had one full appearance in the show, which was okay. But honestly, I felt like Ahsoka was more overshadowed by Sabine. I know Sabine was a big part of the story. She was Ahsoka's apprentice. She was part of Ahsoka's story to kind of get right with the idea that she could be a teacher and to allow herself to fully teach Sabine, even though we learned later on in the season that she stopped teaching her because she was worried she might turn to the dark side, even though she never showed any aptitude for the Force, which is weird. So I think Filoni just dropped the ball there, or maybe he always planned on having it be centered around Sabine, but somebody else decided to call the show Ahsoka. I have no idea. The writer of the article then goes on to talk about fan service and how it should be a tool and how it shouldn't be used for every single thing, which I agree, because Disney Star Wars doesn't really use fan service for the thing it was meant to be used for, which is actually like showing the fans that you care about the original material or the source material. It's not meant to just kind of throw us a line and then hook us on, and then we're just there for the trip, even if the rest of the movie sucks or the rest of the TV series sucks. So I have to agree with that statement. Although they then go again into how the Skywalkers need to stop being shoehorned into the Star Wars series and movies. They say the Book of Boba Fett, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Ahsoka, each one of these series had so much opportunity to push the boundaries of the universe in which they exist. That's the whole point of introducing television to an existing film franchise. By adding long-form storytelling into your sagas, you have the opportunity to explore parts of your galaxy that have never been touched, or to give more meaning to an already beloved character journey. Instead, Lucasfilm has squandered most of their opportunities in favor of hanging out on Tatooine some more. So I agree with that last point. They do keep going to Tatooine too many times, but in terms of the other series, Boba Fett was never meant to explore other new things. They were meant to go back to the criminal underworld. They were meant to go back to Boba Fett. Obi-Wan Kenobi, again, was meant to go back to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader and Tatooine because that's where he was stationed at the time. Ahsoka did have the opportunity to explore some new concepts, and I felt like they spent way too much time of the season in their own galaxy and basically on one or two planets trying to figure out the plan and stop the evil characters from going forward with their plan than the series actually did, exploring. When Ahsoka was announced, I was ecstatic. A whole show just about our girl. She was going to find Thrawn and do whatever she could to stop him. Sure, she'd probably fail, but she'd fight, rally the troops, and fight again. She'd carve her own path outside of the shadow of her master and do everything she could to keep the galaxy safe. Again, I felt like it didn't really matter that she broke out of the shadow of Anakin because the focus of the series was really on Sabine. Instead, we got a whole finale centered on zombie stormtroopers because more toys. I can see why you can be cynical about the zombie stormtroopers and Disney want to make more toys, but I personally enjoyed zombie stormtroopers. They've existed in Legends continuity for a long time, and I've always wanted to see them in a movie or TV series. Meanwhile, the last we saw of Shin Hati and Baylan Skoll, two wildly interesting new characters, was them just standing off in the distance, kicking their feet, their arcs sacrificed in favor of undead soldiers. Not a moment of stakes acknowledged or reckoned with, not a single narrative arc fulfilled, no real climax to be had, just a 6-episode stepping stone to something else. So like I said earlier, I agree and disagree. I went into this knowing that Thrawn was not going to be defeated. He was going to come back to the prime Star Wars galaxy, which meant that Ahsoka and her group was going to fail. And I'd assume that if the writer of this article is as much of a Star Wars fan as they say, then they would also realize that. So you do have to possibly remove certain expectations when you realize how the story is going to end, but I definitely think that it could have been a lot more interesting getting to that point. And yes, I do think Baylan Skoll was enormously wasted, and since the passing of Ray Stevenson means we might not get his character back, I think that we're going to miss out on a huge storyline. Shin doesn't matter. She was just some weird girl who was apprenticed to Baylan Skoll. But overall, I agree with the sentiment of this writer, that too many of these Star Wars series just seem like they are like sort of required reading, but also not. I think the difference between the Star Wars Disney Plus series and the Marvel series is that the Marvel ones, when you watch them alongside the films, the Disney Plus series seem like they don't really matter at all. Versus the Star Wars series, which seem like they matter, but only at certain points and mainly to fulfill some plotline that's going to come out in a more popular series like The Mandalorian. With Ahsoka, I know Dave Filoni has his movie coming out, and I don't know if Ahsoka is going to get a season 2 or if there's going to be a new series that focuses on these characters. You know, perhaps they'll make a New Republic series that focuses on Ezra and Hera, and a separate series or an Ahsoka season 2 that continues with the journey of Ahsoka and Sabine, eventually leading into the Filoni movie alongside The Mandalorian. Either way, I think Filoni really dropped the ball with this series, which is kind of crazy considering he created these characters. But as always, I don't want Star Wars to fail. I don't want Filoni to fail. I want him to be passionate about the things he makes, and I want the things he makes to be good. Same goes for every other creator at Disney. I want Star Wars to be good. I want to enjoy Star Wars again. So you know my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comment section below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate it if you would hit that like and subscribe button, as well as the notification bell so you never miss out on a new video. Thanks for watching.